1931, in a beautiful countryside town surrounded by green hills and grand old estates, lived a young woman named Clara Whitmore. Clara was 22, graceful, intelligent, and known for refusing to follow the rules that society had created for women like her. She loved riding horses, reading novels, and spending time outside, rather than sitting quietly at family gatherings. Her greatest wish was simple. She wanted to marry someone she truly loved. But her father had very different plans for her. The Whitmore family had been struggling financially for years, and their once famous estate was slowly falling apart. One evening, Clara's father called her into his study and told her that he had arranged her engagement to William Harrington, the wealthy heir of the neighboring Harrington estate. Clara was stunned. She had met William several times and never liked him. He was charming in front of their families, but Clara had always found him arrogant and overly confident. "I will not marry him," she said firmly. Her father looked at her with disappointment. "This marriage will save our family." Clara shook her head. "Then let the estate go. I would rather lose everything than marry a man I don't love." But her father gave her one final choice. If she refused the engagement, he would sell the family home and send Clara away to live with her aunt. Clara felt trapped. The engagement was announced the following week. At the engagement dinner, Clara sat beside William while their families celebrated around them. Everyone was smiling except her. Then the doors opened. A young man walked into the room. His name was James Bennett. James was the son of the estate's former groundskeeper. He had grown up on the Harrington property but had left town years earlier to build a life of his own. Now he had returned as the manager of a successful horse breeding business. Clara recognized him immediately. James had always been the one person who never treated her like a wealthy man's daughter. When he looked across the room and saw Clara wearing an engagement ring, his expression changed. For the first time, Clara saw something in his eyes she had never noticed before: jealousy. But James said nothing. Over the following weeks, Clara tried to accept her new life. William was polite, wealthy, and respected by everyone. Yet the more time she spent with him, the more she realized that he didn't truly know her. He wanted a perfect wife. James, on the other hand, seemed to understand her, without her having to explain herself. One afternoon, Clara went riding alone and her horse suddenly became frightened. She lost control and fell from the saddle. Before she could hit the ground, James reached her. He helped her stand and asked, "Are you hurt?" Clara shook her head. Then she looked at him and whispered, "Why do you always appear when I need you?" James smiled sadly. "Perhaps I'm simply unlucky enough to care." Clara's heart skipped. Neither of them spoke about what had just happened. But from that day forward, everything changed. William began noticing how often Clara looked toward James. His jealousy grew, and eventually he confronted James. "You should remember your place," William warned. James calmly replied, "I know exactly where I stand." William stepped closer. "Then stay away from my future wife." James looked toward Clara standing across the garden. "She isn't your wife yet." Those words changed everything. The engagement party was only days away when Clara finally discovered the truth about her family's financial problems. Her father had not arranged the marriage because the Harrington family demanded it. He had done it because William had secretly offered to pay off the Whitmore family's debts. But there was one condition. Clara had to marry him. Clara was furious. She confronted her father and told him she would rather leave the estate than become someone's payment. That night, she removed her engagement ring. The next morning, Clara walked into the garden where both families were gathered. Everyone expected her to announce the wedding date. Instead, she placed the ring on the table. "I cannot marry William." The room fell silent. Her father stood up in anger. William looked humiliated. Then James stepped forward. But Clara stopped him. She looked directly at her father and said, "I don't need another man to decide my future." She had finally chosen herself. For the first time, her father realized that his daughter was no longer the little girl he could protect by making decisions for her. He allowed her to leave, but Clara didn't leave alone. James followed her to the old stable where she had kept her horse since childhood. He looked at her and asked, "Are you sure?" Clara smiled. "For the first time in my life." James took her hand. "I have loved you for years." Clara looked into his eyes. "Then why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I thought you belonged to someone else." Clara smiled softly. "I never belonged to anyone." And that was the beginning of their love story. Not because their families arranged it, not because money forced them together, but because, after everyone else tried to choose their future for them, Clara and James finally chose each other. The morning after Clara broke off her engagement, the Whitmore estate felt completely different. The servants whispered in the hallways, her father refused to speak to her, and the entire town was already talking about the scandal. Clara knew she had disappointed her family, but for the first time in years, she felt free. She had spent her whole life being told what a proper young woman should do, how she should behave, and whom she should marry. Now, even though she had no idea what the future held, she knew one thing for certain: she would no longer allow other people to choose her life. James, however, was worried. He knew Clara's decision had consequences. The Whitmore family depended heavily on the Harrington family's financial support, and William was not the kind of man who accepted rejection easily. "You shouldn't have done this because of me," James told her as they stood near the stable. Clara looked at him calmly. "I didn't. I did it because I refused to marry someone I didn't love." James smiled faintly. "And what about me?" Clara looked away for a moment before answering, "You are the first person who ever made me believe I could choose." Their feelings grew stronger, but their relationship was not easy. Clara's father still refused to accept James. In his eyes, James was simply the son of a former employee, a man who could never give Clara the life she deserved. One evening, he confronted Clara in his study. "You have thrown away a secure future for a man with no family name," he said angrily. Clara stood straight and replied, "I don't need a family name to be happy." Her father shook his head. "Love doesn't pay debts." Clara answered quietly, "Neither does a loveless marriage." Meanwhile, William Harrington was becoming increasingly determined to get Clara back. He visited the Whitmore estate several times, insisting that Clara had made a foolish decision. He reminded her father that without his financial support, the estate could be lost within months. Clara overheard one of their conversations and realized that William was using her family's situation to control them. She decided she would find another way to save the estate. With James's help, Clara began working on a plan. The Whitmore property had hundreds of acres of unused farmland, but the family had never properly developed it. James had experience with horses and agriculture, and together they decided to turn part of the land into a small horse breeding business. It was risky, but it was theirs. They spent weeks working side by side, repairing old stables, preparing the fields, and learning how to manage the business. Clara surprised everyone with how determined she was. She was no longer simply the wealthy daughter of the Whitmore family. She was building something of her own. During those weeks, Clara and James became closer. They laughed together, argued over small things, and slowly discovered sides of each other they had never known. One evening, while they were standing outside the stable after a long day, James gently brushed a strand of hair away from Clara's face. "You know," he said, "you are very different from the woman I imagined." Clara smiled. "Is that good or bad?" James laughed. "Much better." Their moment was interrupted when a carriage arrived at the estate. It was William. He stepped out carrying a document. He walked directly toward Clara's father and announced that he was withdrawing his financial support immediately. The Whitmore family would have only 3 months to repay everything they owed. If they couldn't, William would legally take control of several properties that had been used as security for the family's debts. Clara's father was devastated. That night, he finally admitted the truth to Clara. The family had almost nothing left. The estate could be lost before the summer ended. Clara refused to give up. James encouraged her to continue with their business plan, but there was another problem. They needed money to purchase several valuable horses before another buyer took them. Without those horses, the new business might fail before it even began. Clara was ready to sell her jewelry, but James stopped her. No. She looked at him. You don't have to sacrifice everything. Clara smiled sadly. I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm fighting for my home. James took her hand. Then we'll fight together. They traveled to a nearby town and negotiated with a horse breeder. After hours of discussion, they managed to secure the horses with a payment arrangement. For the first time, their dream began to feel possible. But William was watching. He discovered that Clara and James were trying to save the estate and decided to stop them. He secretly approached the horse breeder and offered him twice the amount Clara had agreed to pay. The next morning, when Clara and James arrived to collect the horses, they were told the deal had been canceled. Clara was devastated. James immediately suspected William. But before they could do anything, a messenger arrived from the Whitmore estate. Clara's father had collapsed. She rushed home. Her father was lying in bed, weak and pale. He looked at Clara for a long moment and finally whispered, I was wrong. Clara sat beside him. I thought I was protecting you. Tears filled his eyes. But I was only protecting the life I was afraid to lose. Clara took his hand. Her father squeezed it. Then he told her something she had never expected. There was one remaining piece of land belonging to the Whitmore family that had never been used as collateral. If they sold it, they could pay a large portion of their debts and give Clara and James enough time to build their business. But there was a catch. The land was the most beautiful part of the estate. It was also the place where Clara had spent her entire childhood. She knew selling it would mean giving up a part of her family's history. That evening, Clara walked alone through the old garden. James found her sitting beneath a large tree. I don't know what to do, she whispered. James sat beside her. You don't have to save the past. Clara looked at him. You only have to decide what kind of future you want. Clara rested her head against his shoulder. For a moment, everything was peaceful. Then James noticed something in the distance. A group of men were standing near the estate's main gate. One of them was William. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood the local bank manager. James immediately stood up. They're here for the property. Clara looked toward them, and suddenly she realized that William wasn't trying to win her back anymore. He was trying to take everything her family had left. Clara stood beside James and watched William approach the estate with the bank manager. For the first time, she understood exactly what William had been planning. He hadn't simply been trying to get her back. He had been waiting for her family to become desperate enough that he could take control of their remaining property. Clara's father had trusted him because he believed the marriage would protect their family, but William had never truly cared about protecting anyone. He cared about power. William stopped in front of Clara and held out several documents. Your family has failed to repay the debt, he said calmly. According to the agreement, the property can now be claimed. Clara looked at the papers but didn't take them. You arranged this from the beginning, didn't you? William's expression remained calm. I offered your family a solution. Your father accepted it. Clara shook her head. You didn't offer him a solution. You created a situation where he had no choice. James stepped forward, but Clara gently stopped him. She didn't want James fighting her battles anymore. She wanted to fight this one herself. You can take the money, she said, but you won't take my family home. William laughed softly. And how exactly do you plan to stop me? Clara looked directly into his eyes. By paying you. William smiled. With what? Clara turned toward the estate. Give me 30 days. Everyone became silent. Even her father, who had come outside despite his weak condition, looked at her in surprise. William laughed again. 30 days? You couldn't save this estate in 30 years. Clara didn't move. Then you have nothing to lose by giving me 30 days. William considered her proposal. He was certain she would fail, and his confidence made him accept. Fine. 30 days. The moment William left, Clara turned to James. We need to make the business work. James nodded. We will. They worked harder than they ever had before. They repaired the old stables, prepared the fields, advertised their horses to wealthy buyers, and began offering riding lessons to visitors from nearby towns. Clara handled the accounts while James managed the horses. For the first time, they weren't simply fighting to save a house. They were building a future together. The first few days were difficult. Almost nobody came. Clara began to worry that William had been right. Then, something unexpected happened. A wealthy family from the city visited the estate after hearing about James's horses. They were impressed by the quality of the animals and offered to purchase 3 of them. The money wasn't enough to save the estate, but it gave Clara hope. More customers followed. By the 3rd week, the stables were busy every day. The business was finally bringing in enough money to make a difference. But William wasn't willing to lose. He secretly spread rumors around town that the Whitmore horses were sick and that the new business was unsafe. Within days, several customers canceled their appointments. Clara was devastated. James wanted to confront William, but Clara refused. No, if we fight him with anger, he wins. Instead, she decided to prove the rumors were false. She invited the town's best veterinarian to inspect every horse. The veterinarian confirmed that the animals were healthy. Clara then opened the stables to the public and allowed anyone to see the horses for themselves. Within a week, the rumors disappeared. The business recovered. On the final day of the 30-day deadline, Clara stood in the estate's main hall with the money they had earned. It wasn't everything they owed, but it was enough to pay the immediate debt and refinance the remaining amount. William arrived expecting to take the property. Instead, Clara placed the payment on the table. You lose, she said. William stared at the money in disbelief. Her father stepped forward. You underestimated my daughter. William looked at Clara with anger. You think this is over? Clara smiled calmly. No, I think it's finally over for you. The bank manager examined the documents and discovered something important. William had secretly altered several parts of the original agreement. Those changes were illegal, and once the evidence was presented, the bank refused to honor his claim on the estate. William's entire plan collapsed. For the first time, Clara's father looked proud of her. Later that evening, the estate was quiet again. Clara walked outside and found James standing near the old garden. You did it, he said. We did it, Clara corrected. James smiled. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring. Clara stared at it. James, he quickly shook his head. Don't worry, I'm not asking you to marry me because your family needs it. I'm not asking because anyone expects it. And I'm not asking because I think I deserve you. He took a breath. I'm asking because I love you. Clara's eyes filled with tears. James continued, but if you say no, I'll still love you. If you need time, I'll give you time. And if you want to build your own life first, I'll stand beside you. Clara smiled through her tears. You really don't understand women, do you? James looked confused. She laughed softly. I've been waiting for you to ask me. James smiled. Is that a yes? Clara held out her hand. It is. He placed the ring on her finger. This time, the engagement was completely different. There were no contracts, no family pressure, no debts, no one telling Clara what she had to do. She had chosen James because she loved him. Months later, the Whitmore estate was no longer struggling. The horse business had grown into one of the most successful in the region, and Clara had become known not as the wealthy man's daughter, but as the woman who had saved her family's home with her own determination. Her father had changed too. He no longer tried to control her future. Instead, he proudly watched his daughter build the life she wanted. And when Clara finally married James, she walked down the aisle without fear. She wasn't marrying the richest man in town. She wasn't marrying the man her family had chosen. She was marrying the man who had stood beside her when she had nothing to offer him except her heart. As Clara reached James, he whispered, "Are you sure?" She smiled, "More sure than I've ever been." James took her hand. And as they walked away together, Clara realized something she would remember for the rest of her life. An arranged engagement had once been forced upon her. But the love that came afterward, that was her choice. And this time, nobody could take it away from her.